Thanks everyone for joining this webinar. We know that these are very interesting times, and even though webinars have been here for a while, it's kind of a new thing for Wizeline, so we're very excited to learn along with you and share a little bit of our knowledge. So that's what we're here for. And for those of you who don't know about Wizeline, I'll do a brief introduction. We help companies develop digital products for global brands like National Geographic and others. And today we're just north of 700 people, and we operate out of 6 countries around the world. We're excited to speak today to a global audience of technologies like yourselves, and hope that we have some wisdom to share. And a bit on why we're talking about this topic is, like I said, at Wizeline, we help companies build products and then take them to market. And Foundations has been a fundamental part of how we help companies build digital products. Joel, who is going to be the main driver of this webinar, is the design director at Wizeline. He brings more than 15 years of experience in the field of design. And most recently, he's worked at Wizeline helping our customers build well thought out digital products. Today's topic is one that Joel and his team have been evolving for a while. And as a result, you can expect the conversation centered around the patterns and principles that make a good foundation for building digital products. You have myself, in a way, acting as the engineering side and Joel as the design side. So this webinar will have a lot of combination of both perspectives regarding foundations. Joel?
Thank you. Thank you, Vidal. So yeah, very excited to be here. This is something that we have working out for a few years now, and I think it's very valuable for us to share the experiences that we have gone through and also this process that we're really proud of. So let me go ahead and present the agenda. So just very quickly, I want to explain the topics that we will cover. So first we'll explain how is that we build products, because we want to position this topic across the different phases in which we work with our clients. And then we can go a bit about the problem space. So how is that teams can be held back from starting the right foot. And then we are going to explain the foundations framework. And then we're going to close with some lean/agile principles. And then we will allow 10 minutes for Q&A. So if you were wondering whether you should be taking notes, or probably you should, but at the same time, I want to tell you that we're going to share this material afterwards. So you don't have to worry about catching all the information that we are going to be presenting. And also I want to explain about the scope of this webinar. So this webinar is about explaining this process that was created by us, by Wizeliners, with the practical experience that we have gathered across different projects. And we are going to go over the phases, the activities, the deliverables, and the outcomes of them. But this webinar is not going to be about going very deeply on the details of each of the activities that we are going to present to you. Because, you know, some activities are so complex that we could have a webinar just for them. So we are going to give an overview of the process and why is that those phases are important for you to take into account, but not so much about the details of each activity. All right, so now we can go over how Wizeline builds products. So first, I want to explain this overview of the process. We have foundations at the beginning, which is the first engagement in which we start working with our clients. And then we have the development of the MVP. The MVP is basically the main outcome of the first phase, which is foundations. And then we can continue working on the evolution and adding more features and functionality to the MVP, or providing support depending on the project that we're working on. And just to give you the context, we are going to focus on foundations, which is this R&D phase in which we start working with our clients, and in which we go through these experiments to validate problems and also validate solutions and make sure that we are providing value through the products that we are designing and developing. So we can gain more certainty as we move forward on the MVP development and the subsequent phases. So yeah, what can hold teams back from starting off on the right foot? So we want to explain a bit the problems that we have run into, because as I mentioned, we have experienced several processes, and in a company such as Wizeline, in which we have the opportunity to work with different verticals and also with different types of projects and teams, we have tried out several processes, and we have discovered which are the things that actually work when we start an engagement with a new client. So let me go through this. So the first one is about solution bias. So usually when we start working on a project, and this can apply not only for you if you are doing product development and design as a service, but also if you are working on a product team for a startup, you usually have this urgency. And at the same time, you have this idea very figured out in your mind, or your stakeholders, they already come to you with this idea, very figured out, and they are hiring you to build it, which is very common. So even though there are a bunch of assumptions that sometimes are very risky, it is difficult to get the chance to spend much time on this discovery and R&D phases, which is one of the problems that we have seen in the past.
And Joel, I also want to mention that I particularly see strong engineering teams get caught up by this solution bias a lot. You tend to jump very quickly to a solution. And what we've seen running foundations is that it's very healthy for teams to take a step back and analyzing that solution from different angles, as you most certainly will touch upon in a few slides.
That's right. And sometimes it's just a matter of awareness of all of the risks and the unknowns that exist in a project. And once you do that, you start working with a greater collaboration along with your clients. So let me go to the next one. Yeah, this is the one, the ultimate solution. So, sometimes after we go through foundations, we discover a bunch of risks, and we clear up a bunch of them. And we also validate kind of a first prototype with the solution idea. But at the same time, we need to evangelize our teams that we need to continue iterating, that this foundations phase is just the first loop of many that are going to continue happening as we continue going through this lean agile process. So it is important for everyone within the team to understand that the vision is going to continue changing as we continue discovering more and more stuff around the product. And sometimes there is a lack of internal alignment. So this means that sometimes we discover that product teams are on the same page around the goals and needs of the users, around the internal goals of the business. And this phase is very relevant for us because when we go through this discovery phase, which is the first phase of foundations, we start getting this feedback around how is that necessary for everyone within the teams that we are working with. So we want to first find alignment and then start experimenting with ideas in which we all are in the same line. So this is kind of the main problems that we have seen. So, once I was speaking with Lane Goldstone from Philosophy, which is she works for this company with whom we have partnered with in the past. And when we were discussing how is that we should do design as part of an agile environment, she said this, and it was very enlightening to me, rather than doing a big phase up front of design and discovery at the beginning, it is important to first define what is the most relevant for you to discover, and then continue doing it across every sprint. So we do what we should be doing what we are used to do, but we should do it less. We should do it more often, collaboratively, and do it incrementally, which are the basic principles of Agile. So now we want to go deeper on the foundations framework. And this is the definition from our side. Foundations framework is a set of asynchronous and synchronous activities to facilitate the discovery process of digital products by describing practical, proven techniques that can help you to manage requirements, develop high quality digital products that achieve business objectives, achieve higher customer satisfaction by setting clear expectations, and uncover complexity and reduce risks. So this is, in a few words, what we define as foundations. And now what we are going to do is to explain in more detail how is that this can be achieved. So for this, what we created over a couple of years was these two options for a foundations process. So as you can see, both of them have 3 phases. But as a spoiler, I can let you know that the first one has generative research. So generative research means that when we go with the option A, we explore the problem a bit more. So we spend some time interviewing users to discover what are the problems that they really want to get solved. And we come back with this feedback to the stakeholders. And the option B doesn't have that. So those are the 2 options. And we are going to explain how is that we can use one of them depending on different attributes or projects. So these are kind of the attributes that we defined when we were thinking of, okay, with which clients should we suggest go with the option B? With which clients should we suggest go and do research? So these are kind of the options. Like if you have a project in which you have a very complex product with multiple touch points, like for example, once a telecommunication company approached to us and told us that they have been working on their customer service, and for their customer service they have created around 15 different portals already, and they were still receiving a lot of feedback that these portals were very difficult to use, and information was so spread out that it was difficult for the users on their client side to understand how to interact and get support. That's when we get a very specific hint that we really need to do research, because they have tried out several solutions and it's difficult to decide right away what should we start experimenting with, talking about the solution. So that's one of the attributes. Also, when you have a very rough idea of the product that you want to build, but you still need to give a lot more shape to it. So it is very relevant for you to first do research and understand which are the problems that you need to solve. And also on the technical side, sometimes you have a lot of integrations or existing applications that we need to get familiar with. And I bet, Vidal, that you can explain a bit more about this one.
Yes, of course. Similar to exploring the integration of multiple systems, as well as if you have a potential scenario of building a platform, this is a great scenario where companies can choose to go with option A of a type of foundations discovery. And in the technical side, it's quite important, and we'll get to it in a bit, that the technical team starts gathering some of the major business goals and then put those business goals into perspective of their technical decisions and their architecture. So it's quite important in a system that might have many touch points and a bit of complexity, several stakeholders and the like, to get as early as possible.
Yeah, that's right. And you know, what you just mentioned is very related to the last one, which is, I believe, is the most important bullet point, because whenever you notice that there is a high risk and uncertainty in every front, like for example, there are very risky assumptions on the user side, or very risky assumptions on the technical side, probably there are integrations that are very complex and we don't know if we will be able to do it on time. That's when we should be suggesting to go through this research phase, because research, it doesn't only mean to go and talk to users and get some user feedback around the problem. It also means to go on the technical side and start understanding the feasibility of the solution that we have in mind. So we should be willing to go through this phase so we can clear up a bit of this risk and uncertainty. So I guess it's a question for you, Vidal. Like, how can you be certain that a product that we build is going to work?
Yeah, I guess this is one of those questions where many people start to believe that there's the right answer. But I guess it starts with a change of how you see things. The simple answer to this is you cannot, right? There's no way you can be certain that a product will work. And in that simplicity of an answer, you can also, well, either throw your hands and say, well, that's not useful, or say, well, it might take a different way of thinking about product building, which is one driven by experiments and an exploratory process to really understand that even though you might do some research, you might have data about your market, your potential users, and who's going to buy your product, still there's no safe bet. And there have been many people that have been comparing product building to placing bets. People at Basecamp actually do that, right? So it's very important the companies stop thinking and managing software projects and begin to adopt a lean product management set of principles. We'll get into that.
That's right. So yeah, once we were very aware of this, is that we started kind of putting together this process in which we try to de-risk every project with this set of activities. So what you are seeing there is that we have three phases, sorry. So first we have business discovery, then we have a phase for research, then we have a product definition and validation phase, in which you can see this is kind of a loop, because depending on the outcome of this phase, we may want to go ahead and prototype and test again. This is a core principle out of lean UX that we are applying here. So as we have mentioned, what we want to do in these phases is first to get a shared mindset around several aspects. One of them is the brand. The other one is the product, the business, and the technology as well. What we want is not only for us to understand the current state of a project, but also to start getting familiar with other elements such as the brand, and at the same time understand how is that the different stakeholders are aligned or not that are aligned around what the goals that they see for the project. And also we want to go through this R&D stage in which we create experiments and we start validating based on these hypotheses and risks that we discover across time. And one of the main goals of this phase is that at the end, we can create an initial scope of how is that we are going to continue working. So as part of this, we try to achieve the definition of an MVP and also create a project plan so we can define what is the team that we need to continue working on this and executing on this idea that we have already validated, with more certainty that this is actually providing value to an intended market. So, you know, when we were discussing around which potential roles should we suggest to you to include so you can go through this process, we decided that it wasn't that the roles weren't that important, but it was more important to have the right skills. So if we focus on the skills rather than the roles, at the end, anyone with the skill should be able to go and to put together and execute on this framework. So the skills are described over there. We have information technologies, business strategy, qualitative research, interface design, interaction design, software architecture, facilitation, and storytelling. And as we go through the description of these activities, you can see how is that these skills are needed. So let us go and describe the activities and the outcomes of each phase. So first, we have business discovery. So in business discovery, what we do these activities described on the right. So we do a kickoff and then stakeholder subject matter expert interviews. And then we do sort of a project canvas, and I'm going to explain what is that about. Business process discovery and mapping, and we start getting ready for the research. But I think it is much better if I explain this across a timeline. So if we see the activities, we can be doing several things at the same time. Like, for example, if you run the kickoff and you introduce your team and start describing what are the activities and the responsibilities of each of the team members, then you can go ahead and start interviewing the different stakeholders, so you can start getting a better sense of what are the goals that each of them want to achieve. And this is very important because sometimes you discover that each stakeholder has a different stake in the project, and they have very important goals to accomplish within their company through this project, and you should be able to help them with that. So that's when you start getting a sense of how aligned are they around the project and what they want this product to end up being once you launch it. And at the same time, we start getting ready for preparation. So we want to do research in the next phase. So it is important to get buy-in from all your stakeholders on the profiles that you want to interview after this. So in this phase is when you start creating a research plan, you start defining interview scripts, you start doing this by yourself, but at the same time, you need to include everyone, especially your main stakeholders, so they agree with the questions that they want to get solved during research, and also the people that they want to interview, the people that they believe are going to be the users of the product that you're about to design and develop. And also there are things as stakeholder interviews. So I believe, Vidal, you can explain us a bit better what happens during these kind of interviews, during the technical stakeholder interviews, right?
Of course. So one aspect that I want to highlight before I get into that is that I think one mistake that teams can do when running an exercise like this is not involving people as soon as they can, especially technical people when we're talking about business discovery. And one of the great advantages that you have when you do is if you involve, let's say, a few key members that will then later become part of the technical team building this product, you will get a lot of empathy about what kind of business problem we're trying to solve. But also from the beginning, you can start getting hints at non-functional requirements that might impact either the business or the product itself, right? You have things around compliance, security, handling of data, and from the business folks, you can get a lot of data in this phase. And the last point that I want to make about this business discovery phase is, as leaders, as Joel was mentioning, this is the phase where you either see that your team is aligned about what you're trying to do, or there's a big misalignment of what is expected as an outcome. And this is where great leaders come in and help make sure that a vision is clear for this product. And it helps allow the team to find that alignment and act upon it in case there isn't. So this is a very key phase, both for discovering non-functional requirements for technical teams and getting some empathy about the business problem that we're trying to solve, and for leaders to make sure that they get alignment from their team early on.
That's right. And, you know, for what you mentioned is very relevant. We discovered at some point that in order for us to break silos, we needed to get the technical lead involved in the stakeholder interviews, in the research preparation, and also the designers to be involved in the technical stakeholder interviews, in the analysis of the technical documentation that already exists. That's the only way for everyone to be in the same mindset around the things that we will be able to build afterwards. So for this, something that we do at the end of this phase is to create some sort of project canvas. So a project canvas is just a generic term that we are using for any kind of canvas that you may use for business alignment. So that can be business model canvas, that can be experience canvas, or lean UX canvas, any kind of canvas that you believe is appropriate for you to get alignment across the different stakeholders. That's something that you can be able to run at this phase. So just very quickly, since as I mentioned at the beginning, we are not going very deeply in the different activities that we run. These are just visual examples of some of these activities, like this one, which is an experience canvas for methylation. And we have run this many times with the stakeholders and also for internal products that we have developed here. And these are journey maps in which we have described the different actors across a journey, and how is that everyone has different pain points and critical activities that they need to perform. That's something that we do to kind of synthesize everything that we get during the stakeholder interviews, and then we come back with the stakeholders and showcase this so we can get another round of feedback. So it is very relevant for you to, after you run the interviews, you come back with an artifact and you show that you are actually getting everything every information that you are synthesizing from the interviews. So this two-way collaboration is crucial for it to happen at every time. So just to close with this stage, the outcomes of this are the ones that we basically already mentioned. So we get an understanding and an onboarding on the business problems, the outcomes that they are expecting, the vision that they have or we have as a team, in case you are working for the startup of a product team. And we start getting a sense of what is the status of current products, should they exist, or also existing technology. And we are basically getting ready for the research phase, which is the one that we are about to cover now. So now, speaking about research, I want to emphasize that we are calling it research and not user research, because we are not only doing user research. So as you can see, we're doing user interviews and observations, and we are debriefing, creating personas, which are artifacts that reflect the needs and goals of the specific groups of people. And we create some experience maps, but at the same time, we start doing technology spikes. And it would be great if you can explain a bit more, Vidal, about what these are about.
Yeah, of course. And if you're interested in knowing how to run them effectively, I believe we linked something on a reference slide later on from one of our Wizeliners that wrote about them. But basically, spikes are a way to walk through a technical implementation and discover some of the unknowns. I think one of the major risks to mitigate when building a system that has major touch points, especially with other external technologies or external systems, is to understand, at least at a basic level, the capabilities of the systems that you're going to integrate with. And spikes is a way for the team to research in a very organized way, in a very short and time-boxed way, how a system might help within the product strategy. But again, spikes is something that you can read upon, and we'll share that information.
Yeah, that's great, because just as we at some point create prototypes that we know that these prototypes might be disposable, because depending on the user feedback, we might continue using them or we may shift to another direction. It is great that the technology side, we are doing the same. So we are building small chunks of the technology that might be disposable, but those are very helpful for everyone to understand the feasibility of the services that we want to integrate. So going back to the timeline, so at this point, probably we already kick off the research, and we are doing user interviews, then synthesizing in personas and needs or problem statements. What we always do, as I mentioned, is to come back and then show to everyone in the team everything that we discovered. And sometimes what we discover as well is that sometimes our clients only have a logo and a color palette, and they don't have very, very developed assets around their brand. And we also do a brand analysis. So what we do is that we get familiar with any brand books or guidelines that the client might have, and we start digesting so we can understand what is the current state of the brand, and we start planning ahead, because at the end, when we create a first prototype of a product, we will need to translate any visual elements from the logo or the brand, anything that they have, into style tiles or UI components, and anything that can show consistency across the user interface. So we start doing this at this point. And also we do market research. So what this means is that we start getting familiar with the vertical that we are getting into, right? In Wizeline, we work with different types of industries, and we need to allow some time for us to get familiar with them and to understand even I don't know, technical jargon that our clients already use and we are not familiar with. We need to allow some time for us to do a bit of research, do comparative analysis, even do some inspirational analysis from other industries and get some ideas around what we can build in the next phase. But this is the right moment for us to go ahead and do that. And as Vidal mentioned, we do technical research, and we start getting for the workshop, which is the first activity from the next for the next phase. So just a couple of examples. This is how we create personas. We start using saturation of variables, which is a technique from social sciences, to create to define the behaviors of a persona, and then we distill everything into personas that we present to the whole team. And also, these are also experience maps. In this case, this is a service blueprint that just shows the different steps across a process for the front stage and the backstage. The front stage meaning what the end user says, and the backstage, everything that happens, internal process that happens inside a company to provide a service. So as we already mentioned, these are the outcomes of research. So we basically, at this point, we get an understanding of the user, of the problem, of the current status of the brand, of the product and the technology, and we get familiar with the competitive market. So at this point, we're very aware of the technology options, and we are reducing uncertainty, because every time we started a project, we had this experience that we had so many questions. It was difficult for us to commit to delivering on specific features. We first needed to go through these phases. This is why research is so relevant for us to go through it. And at this point, we start validating assumptions. So we are not validating assumptions around the product or the solution, but about the problem and the market, and also about the technology. So yes, and something important I wanted to mention is that, you know, I would say that 1 year or 1.5 years ago, something that we did was to start a foundations project with a workshop, like right away. In this phase, we started with a workshop. So what we noticed is that since we didn't allow enough time for us to get familiar with the business that we were working for, or the vertical, as I already mentioned, when we were there in this workshop on site with our clients, we discovered that we knew less about the problem that we wanted to solve than everyone else in the room. So that's why it was a very good decision, I believe, from the team to change the workshop after the research. So as you can see, at this point, we already know everything we need to know about the business, about the users, about the technology. We can arrive to our workshop and be effective along with our stakeholders and make the best use of the team's time. So yeah, I just wanted to clarify that part because that was a very crucial point when we were redefining this process. So moving on to product definition and validation. As I mentioned, this is the phase in which we first run a workshop so we can find some alignment. So we do some product strategy workshops across 2 or 3 days, and then we come back and do it, and then we start prototyping and approach to users and put a prototype in their hands, and then get some feedback so we can come back to stakeholders, and then we can make a decision on how to proceed. So if we go to the timeline, we can see that we dedicate around 1 week to do product strategy workshops. So that doesn't mean that we are on site with our clients during 2 or 3 days. So what I recommend to you is, sorry, for 5 days, what I would recommend to you is to spend 2 or 3 days running workshops, and then you dedicate a couple of days for you to synthesize everything, because in these workshops, you get so much information that is necessary for you to take some time and distill everything and some artifacts that should be useful for everyone else. So we run workshops during a couple of days. I'm going to go back to the previous slide just to describe the activities that we run over there. So as you can see, since we already did research, we already have personas that we can present and analyze with our stakeholders. Then we can go back to the experience canvas or business model canvas that we created at the beginning, and we can refine this with the new understanding that we now got from research. And experience mapping is a very interesting activity because we have customer journey maps or cognitive maps, or we have service blueprints, but you always have either the as-is state of a map or the to-be state. The to-be state meaning the ideal state of how is that your service or your product want to look like in the future, and the as-is state is the current state of your product or service. So what we can do out of research is to create the as-is state of a service or the product. But during the workshop, what we do is to create collaboratively the to-be state. And this is very important for you to do it during a workshop session, because that's when you get all of the attention of the different stakeholders that should be able to make decisions, like final decisions for you to move on after this. And let me go back to the timeline. So as I mentioned, what we do is that we come back and then we start prototyping, and then we create a session with a few real users, so we can put the prototype in their hands and then get some feedback around the solution. So this is a crucial point, because this is when we come back to the team and then we show, okay, this is the feedback that we received. So something that you may discover over there is that people are very excited about the product, and they may ask questions such as, this is amazing, when can I start using this? When is this going to be in the market? How much is this going to cost? This is kind of qualitative, useful feedback for you to infer that the product idea is working or is going to work once you ship something into production. But you can also get the other type of feedback, in which people say things such as, this product is great. I think it's working. I understand what they want to do, but I'm going to continue using my spreadsheets because I'm already familiar with them. So this is kind of the feedback that you receive on this crucial point. So that's why we have this pivot or persevere flag over here, because that's when we have this meeting with our stakeholders. In here, something that we do is that we come back also with the architectural design, and in here we have also discovered a bunch of information around what is feasible and not around the concept that we are testing from the technical side.
And if I may add, Joel, I think as we see this big work here, architectural design, especially for the technical team, is very important that they focus on an architecture that will be extendable for them, to focus on technology decisions that will allow them to go fast. Right now is not the time to plan for major scalability, unless major scalability is the first problem that you're trying to solve. But for most net new products, even if they are extension of existing platforms, you require a very simple architecture that you can evolve and that can help as an elastic base for the team to iterate.
Yeah, and that's great, because during this meeting, what we do is to put all of our cards over the table, and then we have the discussion around what is feasible, what is actually adding value to the intended market, and our job is to provide all of the information that we just gathered, and then we should help the main stakeholders, product owners, to make the decision whether to continue building this or probably go ahead and try a new prototype or try a different solution. Then we are open to that, because what we care about is to provide value, and that should be the goal of everyone within your team as well. Like, rather than trying out a specific technology or I don't know, design tools. The main goal should be to provide value to the end user. So if we decide to continue, because probably the concept testing through very good results or insights, then we start working on the project plan. So these are just a couple of examples when we have done concept testing, we have created prototypes, we approach users and we interview them in person and ask them to go through the prototype. And this is basically a set of activities in which we run customer journey maps. And at the very end, we create a user story map in which we define the MVP. As you can see, this is a line of an MVP. Everything above should be something that we should consider to build in the next phase. And we do this once we have a bunch of insights out of a prototype. So the outcomes, I believe, were already covered. So it's very relevant that all of us get a shared mindset around what is viable, what is not. We define kind of a platform. And, you know, Vidal, something that you mentioned once is that defining a minimum viable platform is as relevant as defining a minimum viable experience, right? Like, I would like you to explain a bit more about that.
Yeah, it is important that both the design of the product as well as the technology choices go hand in hand. It is no use that a technical team decides to be very strict with their ways when design is very flexible, and the other way around as well. So
and I believe this is not the right time for scalability, right? Like to focus
exactly.
on having, I don't know, 500,000 users when you haven't shipped anything just yet.
Exactly. You haven't proven your product, so there's no need to worry about things that will last for a long time. But it's very important I guess, let me phrase it in a different way. It's more important to go fast than to be correct in this phase. And you'll get to that point in a bit.
That's right. So I'm going to move a bit faster just because we're about to end with the process, and also because we want to align for a couple of questions at the end. So yeah, I really like this quote from Jeff Gothelf, in which he says that basically the requirements of a product is something that you continue discovering all the time. So they are never settled, especially not at the end of a phase such as foundations. And you know, about the attributes of companies in the group B. So if you might remember, we had two different approaches for foundations. So the two of them are very similar. The only difference is that we don't do research on these other type of foundations. We don't do generative research, but that's because probably our clients already have very reliable research that we can use, or they have probably very short deadlines. I mean, sometimes you have a very short deadline. Sometimes you might even run out of funding if you don't ship something in 3 months. So and at the same time, you're very certain about what you want to build, and it shouldn't be it shouldn't happen that we push for doing research when certain things are already well defined. So at the end, we're going to approach users with a prototype, and we are going to interview them either way. So we can be a bit flexible in this sense. So yeah, basically these are the kind of the attributes of the companies in which we might suggest to go with the other way.
And there was a question, we'll get to it later, but if startups can shorten this foundations exercise. So in a way, we've already covered that, but we'll get to it later as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I believe this process kind of answers that one. So let me go through it very quickly. So as you can see, we have business discovery, product definition, and validation. And then we do a revision of a problem and the solution after we have tested a prototype. So the purpose is basically the same. The only difference is that we validate the problem in the solution in the same round. So as I mentioned at the end, we're going to approach users. So the activities are basically the same. only removing the part of generative research to discover the problem. So just to highlight a bit more on revising the problem and the solution. So what we do here is to define along with the stakeholders, as I mentioned, whether we should go in the same direction or probably go another way, because this is when we got all of the feedback, and we should be making these decisions at this point before starting to building something. And of course, what we achieve with this is that we avoid waste by investing in an idea, but probably that's not the best. And we find more certainty before moving into development. So yeah, this is another quote from Jeff that says that, yeah, even though prototypes give you a very good sense of what is working or what is going to work in the market, you should be rushing into shipping something as soon as possible so you can get actual data. And lastly, we would like to close with this topic, that is iterative mindset. So I want to put this into context, like foundations is only the first of many loops that are going to continue happening. Okay, so we don't go through foundations and then define a checklist of things that we are going to build because we already know everything. Like, we never know everything. What we need to do is to continue going through this feedback loop so we can continue getting feedback. But the value of foundations is that at first you remove or validate or most of the risk and waste that you could be discovering down the road shouldn't you do foundations. So this is the value. You validate the risk assumptions and also get familiar with some technical constraints and opportunities. That's the value of foundations. So that means that at the end, you'll be focusing only on executing on what you already know because you have a lot of certainty of what is working. And also, what is true is that the fidelity of the product will be increasing, right? Like at the beginning, we test with a prototype made on a vision, probably doesn't have any code behind. And when we start working on creating working prototypes, probably that working prototype doesn't have a perfect UI. Probably everything is hard-coded at the beginning, you know, but we are doing it to start, to continue getting feedback from the users. So this requires a change of mindset from the team members. Like at the beginning, I wouldn't expect designers to ask developers to implement the UI perfectly, but that's something that is going to happen at the end, right? And at the same time, development shouldn't be asking for final mockups because, you know, that term just doesn't exist. Things are going to change all the time, which is part of the basic principles of Agile. And the same thing happens with artifacts. So something that we do is that instead of focusing on doing 2 months of research at the beginning and then create the perfect personas, what we do is that we interview during 2 weeks a few people, and then we create a pro persona. And as we continue going through the project, we continue interviewing people because we're going to continue testing prototypes. So our deliverables, our artifacts are going to evolve and get more complex as the product gets more complex. So we shouldn't stop at the beginning with this kind of intensive research phase, which is very, very painful, I believe, for many stakeholders. And also try to create experiments, try to tell a story when you define the stories that you want to build. So if you are going to choose from a list of stories, choose the stories that tell a story. Like if this is a user journey, choose these stories so you can create a prototype that describes a user flow so you can put it up to test and validate it. And that means that as you go through this validation loops, you are going to change the acceptance criteria because the acceptance criteria is going to be progressive. It's going to be evolving as you describe, as you discover new insights from users and from the technical side.
And I might add that great product managers are very good at doing this, but it's also very hard to distill stories of a backlog. Just the implicit complexity of finding those stories and organizing work is quite hard. But again, if you have people within your organization, especially product managers that can do this very well, you're already on the right track.
Yeah, that's true. And when you create a user story map and you define a backlog of user stories, you know, everyone knows that there is a lot of hidden technical requirements that nobody has discovered just yet. And we need to have that flexibility, which is why this progressive acceptance criteria principle, I really like it. So just to wrap up with this set of principles on what we have discussed, embrace continuous change and progress. Instead of thinking of, you know, I'm going to define a set of requirements and then I'm going to send this to production and get something perfect after 6 months. Embrace the fact that you are going to be discovering things along the way, and we need to have that flexibility to change directions so you can get the outcomes that you really want to achieve. As we mentioned, promote collaboration between your stakeholders and your product team, between developers and designers. Everyone needs to be involved in every activity. And finally, reinforce our learning culture. So we need to change our mindset so we can all agree that we don't know what is going to be the perfect solution, and that we don't know that the solution that we have in mind is actually going to work. If we do that, we start approaching every issue, every challenge with curiosity, and we are open to the feedback that we receive. And we focus on the outcomes. So it is more important for us at Wizeline to understand which are the metrics that you want to achieve. Like, okay, you want to build this product. Yeah, but what is what you want to achieve? If we focus on what you want to achieve rather than what you want to build, it will be way easier for us to provide value to your company. And also that should be the mindset of product teams in startups. So that's it. I rushed it a bit at the end because I wanted to have some time for Q&A.
Hey, thank you, Joel. And so why don't we get through the questions that we have in our Q&A section in order. So Claudio Rivas asked, this process seems for a brand new product. Do these processes work in an existing solution already coded and in production state? What do you think?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Of course. So is this process only for net new products, or can we incorporate some of these techniques for an existing product, for example?
Yes. I mean, this process we have applied for new products, but also for existing products that want to build features that are completely new. So yeah, the answer is for anything new is something that you can apply. Not necessarily needs to be doesn't need to be a new product per se.
And somebody else asked, our stakeholders recently requested to do visioning for our project, which meant to be the envision the future state, and which process within the foundations allows teams to envision that future state? What activities? That's
a very good question. So let me go back just very quickly. So first, you should be able to do that during the business discovery phase, in which you do, after you do stakeholder interviews, you create an experience canvas or a business model canvas, and you create that canvas collaboratively with your stakeholders in a session. And after you have done research, and during the workshop, it should be ideal for you to run this session again to review the canvas and fill in any gaps that may exist. Because at this point you discover new information, it is important for you to review the canvas and refine it. You're in mute, Vidal, sorry.
Sorry. How do you delegate your team? How many designers per project? For example, there's only one designer in most teams, that's to do every stage of design stages and then facilitate workshops on the side. So I think there's a problem that also we face at Wizeline. How do you do it well?
Right. So yeah, the design team has been growing a lot lately, but we started with only four people in this team 3 years ago. So now we are almost 40, and we are able to allocate to 2 designers to each foundation's project. But as I mentioned at the beginning, it is important for us to take a look at the skills. Like if you have a UX designer who can run these workshops, that's the person who should do it. But we have also had project managers running Experience Canvas or Business Model Canvas because they are also very familiar with the business, right? So there are certain activities that you can distribute across your team should they are interested in running exercises with. I believe they should, because it is important for the whole team to be involved on these facilitation activities. Great. So yeah, even one designer can do it if you have a supporting team that can also get involved in these activities.
Right. And then what's the name to evaluate variables in personas? I believe you mentioned it in slide 29 about how you distill that heat map. I believe it came from social sciences. Can you elaborate?
Yeah, this is called variable saturation. So you can look at this in Alan Cooper About Face book, and also in King's Goodwin book that is called Design for the Digital Age. I can confirm the book and add it to the references. But this is a technique in which each of these dots are one interviewee, and you distribute them depending on the answer that they gave you. And when they match, it is when you start creating clusters, and that's when you get a sense of, okay, these clusters in green describe one persona, and you extract the data and put it in the persona artifact at the end.
Great. And for startups, what would you recommend for quick launching? Could we reduce this to 1 or 2 weeks per phase, or even 1 to 2 days?
The short answer is no. No in 1 or 2 days, no in 1 week or 2 weeks. And I can tell you this, I'm very sure, because we have tried out and it hasn't given us the best results, but you can do it in 4 weeks, right? If you can spend a month analyzing the business problems and then doing a bit of research and then prototyping and testing, that should be enough 4 weeks for you to do it if you have the whole team dedicated to this. But also, I wouldn't advise to do it in less time because sometimes you are very rushed, and it is important to analyze the data that you get just as much as the time that you spent on getting data. And
then somebody asked, which I believe is more of a technical question, and so I'll try to get take a stab at it. So sorry to ask this question, but is the system definition and functional definition of traditional methodologies replaced by these process outcomes, or do they keep alive but no other part, but on another part of the engineering or development side? No, we've even seen techniques from the rational unified process. If I remember correctly, the acronym being used in these phases. There's sequencing diagrams that we've seen teams use. Write use cases in traditional ways. This is not an attack or a different way at doing things at traditional ways. It's just a way to integrate everything within the same context and kind of condense it in an initial phase to get the most out of it, which goes aligned to another question that I think was asked immediately after that, which was, at what point during this process is the development team involved? We mentioned a couple of times, but it's important to reiterate as early as possible. You might not have the ability to add the whole team at the beginning, the same way you might not be able to add the whole leadership team, the whole design team, but at least key stakeholders so that there's continuity in the concepts and the work being done, definitely as soon as possible.
Yeah, and something that we do is that we at least have a technical lead involved across the whole process. They are part of the workshops. They are doing technical stakeholder interviews. They are even taking notes during the user interviews and during the validation. So everyone is involved across the different phases, because that's the only way that in which we can get a shared mindset.
And then somebody asked, which is the last one in the Q&A, and then I'll jump to the ones being asked impromptu on the chat. Is this process designed for a specific market? I mean, I think, well, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, I don't think so. We have tried this process across different verticals, from telecommunications, entertainment, retail, and it works very well. And what we adapt are the activities, but not the phases. The phases, we keep them as they are, no matter the industry that we are working with.
Great. And then let me see if I can follow this correctly from the chat. Any solution when the user or customer is not familiar or don't know about Agile, and how does this impact the project and the costs? This is a more of a philosophical question, and I'll take a first stab at it. If you have a customer or an organization that doesn't understand Agile yet, there's more of a cultural shift that needs to happen. It doesn't limit you in your ability to run something like this, but definitely you need to probably change even the way people work, because what we're talking about here is rapid experimentation and fast ways of prototyping ideas. And if your organization culturally is not set up for that, you'll have a little bit of a difficult time, but you shouldn't stop doing this, even if you are in an organization that yet doesn't fully embrace Agile. Well, do you want to add something to that?
Not really. I believe that answer was just on point.
Great. And then, interesting. Are there any case study where you applied this process for business process improvement where UI was not an important factor? So have we done this for, let's say, improving a business process or a system that doesn't have a kind of design element?
Yes, we have done this with a service design approach. So we have run, and even when the times that we have done that, it looks like initially it has a UI approach or a product design approach. And then in the middle, we discovered that first we need to build an infrastructure around, meaning a service that we need to put together. So the products that we add to, at the different touch points of the service that actually work. So we have run foundations in which we end up prototyping services rather than products. And the final deliverable of that is a playbook of processes sometimes that they need to change internally the company so they can support the products that they wanted to build at the beginning.
Great. And then just one last one before we close, and we really appreciate for the people that were able to spend a couple of minutes more after the hour. So what could be the key questions to stakeholders from the business at the beginning of the process of redesigning an application?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, during the stakeholder interviews, it is very relevant to understand what is your vision for this product? What are the metrics that you want to achieve and why? How is going to be your participation in this project? How much involved do you want to be? And also when you start asking these questions, you start ideating on new questions so you can discover which is what they care about. And something very relevant is that sometimes during stakeholder interviews, you see the opportunity to get a demo on specific tools, and you should be able to do that. Like if they mention, we have been using these reports and they are not really useful, we have received a lot of feedback, you should be asking for the stakeholders to share the screen and to see those reports and start taking notes of their opinion on what is not working. And sometimes how is that those things that are not working within the business is affecting the business unit in specific. Because usually what you see when you get into a project is that every stakeholder has a different interest or a different problem that they want to solve for their team, not for the company as a whole, but for their team. And you should be able to understand that.
Right. Well, Joel, first, thank you for spending the time sharing this knowledge with all of us. I definitely learned a lot. Yeah, there you go. You want to talk about the references?
Thank you. Thank you, Vidal. Yeah, just to mention that we, as part of the deck that we're going to share with the audience, there are these references that the team that is working on this process have used to. And yeah, the links are there. And there, I just want to call out a specific article that you mentioned, Vidal, which is this article from Eric Villa around running spikes, which is mentioned in the process. So if you want to go through it, that'll be great.
Excellent. Well, this has been a pleasure to share this time with you. We really appreciate all of the great questions that you asked and that you spent a little bit over an hour with us. And reach out if you have some feedback, or if you want to see webinars and topics around this product playbook, or any other topics that we might be able to share. So thank you, Joel, and thank you to the audience.
Thank you. This was great.